A dying billionaire made an unusual request to his nurse. Pretend to be his daughter for just one day. She agreed out of compassion, but what unfolded next left them both utterly shocked. Hours later, his cold and calculating wife burst into the room with a lawyer and an inheritance document, revealing a web of secrets that would change their lives forever. The sunlight filtered weakly through the tiny window of Anna Carter's cramped apartment, casting a soft glow over the cluttered table in the corner. Bills, stacked in uneven piles, competed for space with a well-worn notebook filled with handwritten job applications and scribbled notes. The air carried a faint chill, hinting at the coming winter. Anna, seated at the table, stared at the array of papers in front of her, her fingers lightly tracing a red past-due stamp on one of the envelopes. She sighed deeply, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on her. At 28, Anna was no stranger to hardship. Orphaned as an infant, she had grown up in a string of foster homes, learning early on that she could only rely on herself. Her determination and resilience had carried her through nursing school, but life since then had been a constant uphill battle. And now her body was betraying her. Anna pressed a hand to her temple, willing away the dizziness that had plagued her for weeks. "I just need to push through," she murmured to herself, her voice low but firm. "If I can find a job soon, I can afford a doctor and figure this out." But job offers were scarce and her savings were dwindling fast. She flipped through a worn newspaper, circling a few nursing positions with shaky hands, though she knew most were long shots. "Please, just one opportunity," she whispered, sending the words out into the universe like a prayer. As if in answer, her phone buzzed on the table, startling her. The screen lit up with an unfamiliar number. Hope flickered in her chest as she picked up the device, hesitating only for a moment before answering. "Hello?" she said, her voice tentative. "Good afternoon," a woman's voice responded, sharp and authoritative. "Is this Anna Carter?" "Yes, this is Anna," she replied, sitting up straighter. "My name is Claire Benson. I'm looking for a nurse to care for my husband, Edward Benson. Your name was recommended to us." Anna's brow furrowed. "I don't recall applying for this position," she admitted, her tone cautious. "It was my husband who heard of your services," Claire interjected quickly. Her voice carried an edge, as though she wasn't accustomed to explaining herself. "We urgently need someone with experience. Can you come to the estate today for an interview?" Anna's heart skipped a beat. The Bensons were a well-known name in the city, synonymous with wealth and influence. This could be the break she desperately needed. Swallowing her uncertainty, she answered, "Yes, of course. I can be there today." The Benson mansion was everything Anna had imagined, and more. Towering iron gates opened to a sprawling estate surrounded by meticulously manicured gardens. The grandeur of the building itself, with its gleaming marble exterior and towering windows, was enough to make Anna pause as she stepped out of the cab. She clutched her bag tightly, her nerves buzzing. "You've got this," she whispered to herself before approaching the front door. A butler answered her knock and led her inside, where she was met by Claire Benson. Claire was a tall, elegant woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and a sharp gaze that seemed to assess Anna in an instant. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something cold in the way she held herself. "You're punctual. That's good," Claire said, leading Anna into a lavish sitting room. "Please, sit." Anna sat carefully on the edge of a velvet armchair, her posture stiff. Claire didn't bother with pleasantries, launching straight into the details of the position. "My husband Edward has been diagnosed with a rare illness. The doctors claim he has only a few months left, but I'm convinced they're exaggerating," Claire said dismissively, waving a hand as though Edward's condition was an inconvenience rather than a tragedy. Anna's heart ached at Claire's tone. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said softly. "May I meet Mr. Benson? I'd like to understand his needs firsthand." Claire hesitated, her sharp features tightening briefly. "Of course," she said finally, "but don't expect much. He's fragile." As they made their way through the grand hallways, Anna couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Claire's demeanor seemed more calculated than concerned, and the house, though stunning, felt cold and impersonal. When they reached Edward's room, Anna barely had time to take in her surroundings before a violent coughing fit broke through the stillness. Without thinking, Anna rushed forward, finding Edward pale and struggling for air in his oversized bed. "He's not breathing," Anna exclaimed, her training taking over as she adjusted his position and began chest compressions. The next few moments were a blur of action and adrenaline. Finally, Edward gasped for air, his chest heaving as his eyes fluttered open. Anna sighed in relief, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "Thank you," Edward rasped, his voice weak but filled with genuine gratitude. "You have angel hands." Anna smiled softly. "I'm just glad I was here in time." From the doorway, Claire watched the scene unfold, her expression unreadable. "It seems you've made yourself useful," she said coolly. "But I assure you, this was just an accident. I can take care of my husband on my own." Edward, however, had other ideas. "No," he said firmly, his voice stronger than before. "I want her to stay. I still have a say in this house, Claire." Claire's lips thinned, but she didn't argue further. Anna looked between them, sensing the tension, but focusing her attention on Edward. "If you'd like me to stay, I'll do everything I can to help," Anna said, addressing Edward directly. "But given your condition, I'll need to stay nearby to monitor you closely." Edward nodded, his gratitude clear. "You can stay as long as you need. Claire, make sure she has a proper room." Claire's expression darkened, but she forced a tight smile. "Of course." Later that evening, as Anna settled into a small guest room tucked away in a quiet corner of the mansion, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had stepped into something far more complicated than she had anticipated. Still, as she thought about Edward's fragile condition and the warmth in his eyes when he thanked her, she resolved to stay. The rest of the evening passed in a haze for Anna. She was shown to a modest guest room at the far end of the mansion, where she unpacked her small bag. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she allowed herself a moment to process everything that had happened. She thought of Edward's frail body and the way his eyes had looked at her, so full of gratitude, as if she had given him something more than just a second chance at breathing. She thought of Claire's cold demeanor and the tension that seemed to hang over the house like a storm cloud. There was something more going on here, something she couldn't yet put her finger on. The soft morning light filtered through the curtains of Edward Benson's room, casting a warm glow on the space that seemed at odds with the heaviness inside. Anna quietly entered, balancing a tray with breakfast and medications. Edward was already awake, propped up against the pillows, staring out the window at the sprawling garden below. "Good morning, Mr. Benson," Anna said softly, her voice cutting through the silence. She placed the tray on the side table and began arranging his medications. Edward turned his head, his green eyes faintly lighting up. "Good morning, Anna, and please call me Edward. I think we've passed the formalities by now." Anna smiled, pulling up a chair beside him. "All right, Edward. How are you feeling today?" "About the same," he admitted, his voice tinged with weariness. "But seeing a friendly face helps more than you know." Anna's smile softened. "Well, I'll take that as a good sign. Let's get through breakfast and then we'll talk about the day." Days turned into weeks, and Anna fell into a steady rhythm caring for Edward. The mornings were spent administering his medications and assisting with his meals. Afternoons often passed with quiet conversations or moments of calm as Edward rested. She adjusted to the rhythm of the household, though the tension with Claire never eased. Claire's cold glances and cutting remarks were a constant reminder that Anna was not entirely welcome, but Edward's warmth and gratitude made the challenges easier to bear. He would often regale Anna with stories from his younger days, his voice gaining strength as he spoke of the past. She learned about his love for sailing, his admiration for classic literature, and his regrets, ones he kept vague but always hinted at during their conversations. One day, as Anna helped Edward settle back into bed after his afternoon medication, he sighed deeply. "It's strange," he began, his voice thoughtful. "You spend your whole life building something, wealth, success, reputation. But when you're lying here, none of it matters. The only thing that matters is who you have by your side." Anna hesitated, unsure how to respond. She sensed the weight of his words but didn't want to press too hard. "You have people who care about you, Edward," she said gently. "That's what matters now." He gave her a faint smile, though his eyes remained distant. "Do I? I'm not so sure." As Anna spent more time in the mansion, She couldn't ignore the unease building in her chest. Edward's condition seemed to be worsening, despite her careful monitoring and adherence to his treatment plan. She also noticed strange details, medications going missing or appearing without explanation, a faint bitterness in Edward's tea that he occasionally remarked on but dismissed. One afternoon, as Anna prepared Edward's lunch in the kitchen, she overheard two staff members whispering nearby. "He doesn't look like he'll last much longer," one of them said in a hushed tone. "Mrs. Benson seems eager for it to be over," the other replied, her voice laced with unease. Anna froze, her grip tightening on the tray she was holding. She didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the murmured words confirmed the gnawing suspicion she had been trying to suppress. Claire's indifference wasn't just coldness, it was calculated. That evening, as Anna sat beside Edward's bed, she decided to bring up the subject that had been weighing on her mind. She chose her words carefully, not wanting to alarm him. "Edward, can I ask you something?" she began. He turned his head toward her, his expression curious. "Of course. Have you noticed anything unusual with your medications or your food?" she asked hesitantly. Edward's brow furrowed. "Why do you ask?" Anna hesitated, debating whether to share her suspicions. Finally, she said, "I just want to make sure everything is being handled properly. Your health is so fragile, and I want to be certain nothing is being overlooked." Edward studied her for a long moment before nodding. "I've had my own suspicions," he admitted, his voice low. "Claire, she's not the woman I married. Somewhere along the way she changed. I think it was when the doctors gave me my prognosis. She became more distant, more focused on practical matters." Anna frowned. "What do you mean by practical matters?" Edward's gaze darkened. "The will, the estate, everything I built. It's all she seems to care about now." Anna's stomach turned at his words. She wanted to reassure him, to tell him he was imagining things, but the look in his eyes told her he wasn't. Despite the unease that lingered in the house, Anna and Edward grew closer with each passing day. Their conversations became more personal, more vulnerable. Edward began sharing pieces of his life that he had kept buried for years. One afternoon, as they sat by the window overlooking the garden, he turned to Anna with a wistful expression. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like to have a family?" he asked. Anna hesitated, the question catching her off guard. "I think about it sometimes," she admitted. "Growing up in the system, I always dreamed of finding someone who would choose me, someone who would make me feel like I belonged." Edward's gaze softened. "You deserve that, Anna. Everyone deserves that." She smiled faintly. "It's just a dream now. I've made peace with it. But thank you." Edward didn't respond immediately, his eyes distant as though lost in thought. Finally he said, "I've always regretted not being there for someone important, someone I should have fought harder for. It's one of the things I think about the most now." Anna tilted her head. "Who was it?" Edward's lips pressed into a thin line. "My child," he said quietly. "I don't know where they are, or if they're even alive. But if I could see them just once, that would mean everything." Anna's heart ached at his words. She didn't know what to say, but she reached out and placed a hand over his. "Maybe you'll get that chance," she said softly. Edward gave her a small, sad smile. "Maybe." The heavy rain pattered against the windows of Edward Benson's room, muffling the sound of the crackling fire in the corner. Anna sat at his bedside, carefully adjusting the pillows behind him. Edward looked more frail than ever, his pallor stark against the dark wood of the room's walls. Yet his green eyes still held that flicker of determination Anna had come to admire. As she placed a tray of tea and his evening medications on the side table, Edward cleared his throat softly, drawing her attention. "Anna," he began, his voice weak but steady, "I need to ask something of you. Something unusual." Anna paused, her hands mid-air as she reached for the teacup. His tone carried a gravity that made her stomach tighten. "Of course, Edward. What is it?" He hesitated, his fingers gripping the blanket loosely. "You've been so kind to me. You've treated me not just as a patient, but as a person, and for that, I'm grateful." Anna smiled faintly, sitting down beside him. You don't need to thank me, Edward. It's what I'm here for. He shook his head weakly. No, it's more than that. You've given me hope. Hope that I might have one last meaningful moment before I go. Anna's brow furrowed in concern. You're not going anywhere, Edward, she said firmly. We're going to keep fighting this. But Edward gave her a small, sad smile. Anna, I know my time is short. And before it's too late, there's something I need you to do for me. Edward's hands trembled as he reached for hers, his voice breaking as he spoke. I need you to pretend to be my daughter, just for a day. The words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. Anna's heart skipped a beat as she tried to process what he was asking. Pretend to be your daughter? She repeated, her voice laced with confusion. Edward nodded, his gaze pleading. I've made mistakes in my life, Anna. I've pushed people away, neglected what truly mattered. And now, I fear I won't have the chance to make things right. But if you could let me feel, just once, what it might have been like to have my child by my side, it would mean the world to me. Anna stared at him, her throat tightening. She could see the vulnerability etched into every line of his face, the unspoken pain of a lifetime of regrets. Edward, why me? He gave a weak chuckle. Because you remind me of what I always imagined my child would be like. Strong, kind, and compassionate. You've brought light into my darkest days, Anna. Please just grant me this one kindness. Before Anna could respond, the door burst open, and Claire Benson strode in with determined steps. Behind her was a man in an impeccably tailored suit, holding a leather briefcase. Claire's icy demeanor filled the room, and the warmth of the moment evaporated. It's time, Edward, Claire said sharply, her eyes flicking toward Anna with disdain. The lawyer is here. You need to sign the will. Edward's jaw tightened, his expression hardening for the first time since Anna had known him. I won't sign anything, he said firmly. Not today. Claire's expression darkened, her lips pressing into a thin line. Don't be ridiculous, Edward. You've been putting this off for weeks. It's crucial that we finalize things now. Anna watched the exchange in stunned silence, her gaze darting between them. She could feel the tension radiating from Edward as he struggled to hold his ground. I said no, Claire, he repeated, his voice rising slightly despite his frailty. I'll decide what happens to my estate when I'm ready, not when it suits you. Claire's eyes narrowed, but before she could respond, Edward's body convulsed as a violent coughing fit overtook him. Anna sprang into action, rushing to his side to help him sit upright and ease his breathing. As Edward gasped for air, Claire stood back, her arms crossed and her expression cold. This is exactly why we need to handle the will now, she said flatly. You're getting worse by the day, Edward. It's irresponsible to leave things unresolved. Anna shot her a sharp glare. Can't you see he's struggling? This isn't the time to pressure him about legal documents. Claire's gaze snapped to Anna, her eyes narrowing. Stay out of this. You're just the nurse. Edward's voice, weak but defiant, cut through the tension. She's more than that. Anna is the only person in this house who cares about me, not my money. Claire's face flushed with anger, but before she could respond, Edward's condition worsened. His breathing became labored, and the monitors beside his bed began to beep erratically. Anna turned her full attention to him, her hands moving with practiced precision as she worked to stabilize him. When Edward finally settled, his breathing shallow but steady, he reached for Anna's hand. His grip was weak, but his eyes held a desperate urgency. Please, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Don't let her take everything. Protect me. Anna nodded, her heart aching as she squeezed his hand. I promise, Edward. I'll do everything I can. As Claire and the lawyer exchanged tense whispers in the corner, Anna noticed something unusual on the side table. A small envelope and an unfamiliar vial of medication. Her stomach twisted with unease. She knew every prescription Edward was taking, and this wasn't one of them. Her gaze flicked to Claire, who was now watching her with a cold, calculating expression. Anna felt a chill run down her spine. Something wasn't right. The tension in the room reached a breaking point when Claire turned back to Anna. You've done enough for today, she said curtly. You can leave now. Anna opened her mouth to argue, but Claire's cold glare silenced her. Two staff members appeared at the door, ready to escort her out. Before she left, Anna cast a final glance at Edward, who gave her a faint, sorrowful smile. "Remember your promise," he murmured. Anna nodded, her heart heavy as she was led out of the room. She clutched the envelope she had discreetly taken from the side table, her mind racing with questions. What was in the envelope? And what was Claire really after? Rain drenched Anna Carter as she stood outside the towering gates of the Benson mansion. The cold drop seeped through her thin coat, but she barely noticed. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of questions and fears. Clutched tightly in her hand was the envelope she had taken from Edward's room, a small but weighty mystery that she hoped would hold some answers. Her legs trembled as the events of the evening replayed in her mind. Edward's pale face, his desperate plea for protection, and Claire's calculating gaze all swirled together in a storm of worry. "I can't let him down," she murmured to herself, wiping rain from her face. "I promised him I'd protect him." With trembling fingers, she opened the envelope. Inside was a folded piece of paper. She hesitated, her heart pounding before smoothing it out. Her eyes scanned the contents, and what she read left her breathless. The document was a paternity test. Edward Benson was the father of a biological child. Anna's eyes darted to the small but crucial details. There was no name for the child, only the confirmation of Edward's paternity and a note about a shared rare genetic condition. The same illness that was now threatening Edward's life. Anna's hands shook as she tried to piece it all together. "He has a child," she whispered. "Is that who he wanted to meet? Is that why he asked me to pretend to be his daughter?" Her thoughts raced. The test offered no clue about the identity of Edward's child. Could it be someone she knew? Or someone Claire had deliberately kept hidden? The idea of Claire suppressing the existence of Edward's heir made Anna's stomach turn. She wouldn't, would she? A loud clap of thunder jolted Anna out of her thoughts. She stuffed the paper back into the envelope and hurried to the nearest taxi stand. Every step felt heavier as her body reminded her of her own frailty. The illness that had been gnawing at her for weeks was catching up, but she couldn't stop now. "Hospital. Quickly, please," she told the driver, her voice barely above a whisper. The driver nodded, sensing her urgency, and sped off through the rain-soaked streets. Anna leaned her head back against the seat, clutching the envelope tightly. "Hold on, Edward," she whispered to herself. "I'm coming." When Anna arrived at the hospital, she was soaked to the bone. Her breaths labored as she stumbled toward the reception desk. The bright fluorescent lights and sterile smell of the hospital were a sharp contrast to the storm raging outside. "I need to see Edward Benson," she said, her voice hoarse but firm. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with a kind but professional demeanor, glanced at her computer screen. "I'm sorry, but only immediate family members are allowed to visit him right now. He's in critical condition." Anna hesitated, her heart sinking. She couldn't risk being turned away. Clutching the envelope tightly, she made a bold decision. "I'm his daughter," she said, her voice trembling slightly but determined. "I have proof." The receptionist arched an eyebrow but didn't question her further. She gestured to a nurse nearby. "Take her to Mr. Benson's room." Anna followed the nurse down a series of long corridors, her pulse quickening with every step. When they reached Edward's room, the sight that greeted her made her heart clench. Edward lay in bed, surrounded by machines that beeped steadily, though faintly. His face was pale, his body frail, and his breathing shallow. He looked as though he was slipping away. A doctor stood near the bed, reviewing Edward's chart. He glanced up as Anna entered. "Are you his daughter?" he asked, his tone laced with skepticism. Anna nodded, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "Yes? How is he?" The doctor sighed, his expression grim. "Not good. His condition has deteriorated rapidly over the past few hours. We're doing everything we can, but—" He hesitated, clearly reluctant to finish the sentence. Anna stepped closer to Edward, her throat tightening as she took his hand in hers. His skin was cold, and the faint rise and fall of his chest seemed agonizingly slow. "Edward, it's me," Anna whispered, leaning closer to him. "I'm here. I promised I wouldn't leave you, and I won't." Though his eyes remained closed, she swore she saw his fingers twitch slightly. It was the smallest of movements, but it was enough to reignite her determination. She turned to the doctor. "Is there anything at all that hasn't been tried yet?" she asked. The doctor hesitated. "We're limited in what we can do given his condition. There's a medication in trial that might help, but it's not yet approved for widespread use. We'd need authorization from his pharmaceutical company to proceed." Anna's mind raced. She remembered the vial she had seen in Edward's room earlier that day, the one that hadn't been catalogued with his other medications. Could that have been the trial drug? Did Edward know something that he hadn't been able to tell her? Before she could explain her suspicions, the door to Edward's room swung open, and Claire strode in, her heels clicking sharply against the tiled floor. Her eyes narrowed when she saw Anna. "What are you doing here?" Claire demanded. "I told you to stay away." Anna stood her ground, her body trembling but her resolve unshaken. "I'm here because Edward needs me. He asked me to protect him, and that's exactly what I'm going to do." Claire scoffed, folding her arms. "You? Protect him? Don't be ridiculous. You're nothing more than a nurse." Anna stepped closer to Edward's bed, shielding him as if her presence alone could ward off Claire's coldness. "I'm more than that," she said firmly. "I'm someone who actually cares about him, unlike you." Claire's expression twisted with anger, but before she could respond, Edward's monitors let out a sudden sharp beep. Anna turned to see his breathing falter, his chest heaving unevenly. The doctor rushed to the bedside, barking orders to the nurses. "We're losing him! Prepare for resuscitation!" Anna felt her heart drop, but she refused to give in to despair. She clutched Edward's hand tightly, whispering, "Hold on, Edward, just hold on." Her mind raced as she thought about the paternity test and the hidden medication vial. Everything pointed to something far bigger than she had imagined, a truth she hadn't yet fully unraveled. But one thing was clear. Edward's time was slipping away, and she had to act fast. As the medical team stabilized Edward and the alarms quieted, Claire entered the room again, her sharp heels clicking on the tiled floor. Her cold gaze immediately fell on Anna, and her lips curled into a disdainful smirk. "What are you still doing here?" Claire asked, crossing her arms. "You've overstepped your boundaries enough. It's time for you to leave." Anna straightened her back, summoning every ounce of strength she had left. "I'm not going anywhere," she said firmly. "Edward asked me to stay by his side, and I'm going to honor that." Claire's expression darkened, and she stepped closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You're nothing but a nurse. Don't think for a second that you're part of this family or that you have any say in what happens here." Anna met her glare head-on. "Family? You're the one who doesn't act like family. Edward is fighting for his life, and all you care about is his money." Claire's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Anna thought she might slap her. But instead, Claire turned her attention to the doctor. "I want her removed from this room immediately," she demanded. The doctor hesitated, glancing between Claire and Anna. "Mrs. Benson, she's been helping Edward, and frankly, he seems more at ease with her here. For now, I think it's best we focus on his health." Claire's jaw tightened, but she didn't argue further. With one last withering glare at Anna, she stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. As the tension in the room settled, Anna moved to Edward's side. His breathing was shallow, but his eyes fluttered open, meeting hers. He looked weaker than ever, but there was a faint glimmer of recognition in his gaze. "Anna," he whispered, his voice barely audible. She leaned in closer, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. "I'm here, Edward. I'm not leaving you." His fingers twitched slightly as though trying to reach for her hand. Anna took his hand gently, squeezing it to let him know she was there. "I need one last favor," he said, his voice so faint she had to strain to hear him. "Anything," Anna replied, her voice breaking. Edward's lips trembled as he struggled to speak. "Be my daughter, just for today." Anna's breath hitched. The words hit her like a bolt of lightning, but she didn't hesitate. "I already promised you, Edward. I'll be your daughter, for as long as you need me." A faint, tearful smile tugged at his lips. "Thank you," he murmured before his eyes drifted shut again. After ensuring Edward was resting, Anna stepped out of the room to clear her thoughts. Her legs felt like lead, and the weight of Edward's request pressed heavily on her chest. As she leaned against the cool wall of the hallway, she pulled the paternity test from her pocket and stared at it. He has a real daughter out there, she thought. Why hasn't anyone told her about him? Why hasn't Claire said anything? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. She looked up to see Dr. Philip Harrington approaching her. He was Edward's trusted physician, and his concerned expression mirrored her own. "Anna," he said, stopping in front of her, "I wanted to check on you. You've been through a lot." Anna shook her head. "I'm not important right now. Edward is. Dr. Harrington, I found this." She held up the paternity test. "Edward has a biological child. Did you know?" The doctor's face darkened and he sighed heavily. "Yes, I'm aware. Edward confided in me about it a while ago. He's been trying to locate his child, but there were complications." Anna frowned. "Complications? Like Claire interfering?" Dr. Harrington hesitated before nodding. "Claire has done everything she can to keep Edward isolated. She didn't want anyone else to have a claim to his estate, but I believe Edward wanted you to have that document for a reason. He trusts you." Anna clutched the paper tightly, her resolve hardening. "Then I'll do whatever it takes to protect him and find his child." When Anna returned to Edward's room, she found him awake, though his breathing remained labored. She sat beside him, her hand resting lightly on his. "Edward, I need to ask you something," she began gently. "Why didn't you tell me about your child sooner?" Edward's gaze shifted to her, and his eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I didn't want to burden you," he said weakly, "and I didn't know how to face it. What if they hated me? What if I was too late?" Anna's heart ached at his vulnerability. "They deserve to know you, Edward, and you deserve a chance to meet them. It's not too late." He gave her a faint smile. "You're kind, Anna. Too kind. I wish—" His voice trailed off as his energy faded, but the gratitude in his eyes spoke volumes. Anna stayed by Edward's side long into the night, her hand never leaving his. As he drifted in and out of consciousness, she whispered stories of a life they might have shared, a walk on the beach, a morning of laughter, an afternoon spent watching the waves. It was a promise, one she vowed to keep in whatever way she could. But in her heart, Anna knew that the clock was ticking. If Edward's real daughter wasn't found soon, the chance to reunite them might slip away forever. The next morning, Anna awoke in the corner chair of Edward's hospital room, her head resting against the wall. The faint beeping of the heart monitor reassured her that Edward was still holding on, though his condition remained critical. She rubbed the sleep from her eyes and adjusted the blanket she'd draped over herself the night before. Edward stirred slightly in the bed, his eyes fluttering open. Despite his frailty, his gaze softened when he saw Anna. "You stayed," he murmured, his voice hoarse. "Of course I did," Anna replied, moving to his side. "I told you I'm not going anywhere." Edward gave a faint smile before his expression turned serious. "Anna, there's something I need to tell you. I don't have much time left, and you deserve to know the truth." Edward gestured weakly toward the side table, where Anna had placed the paternity test she'd been carrying. She handed it to him, her heart pounding. "You've already seen this, haven't you?" Edward asked, his voice trembling. Anna nodded. "Yes, I know you have a child, but I don't know who they are or why you didn't tell me sooner." Edward's eyes filled with tears as he clutched the document. "I didn't know who they were either, not until recently. Your name wasn't on the test results at first, Anna. It took months for the final records to confirm what I suspected." Anna's breath hitched. "What do you mean?" Edward's hand reached for hers, his grip weak but steady. "Anna, you're my daughter. You're the child I've been searching for." The words hit Anna like a tidal wave. For a moment, she could only stare at him, her mind racing to make sense of it all. "Me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But how? How could I not know?" Edward's eyes shimmered with regret. "Your mother left me before you were born. I didn't even know she was pregnant. By the time I found out, she had already left you in an orphanage. I searched for years, Anna, but I never found you. Not until Claire started digging through my records, hoping to find heirs she could eliminate from the equation." Anna's chest tightened as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. "Claire knew about me? She kept this from you?" Edward nodded weakly. She thought if she hid the truth, no one would stand in her way of inheriting everything. But when I saw your photo, Anna, I knew. You look just like your mother." Tears streamed down Anna's face as the reality of Edward's words sank in. All her life, she had dreamed of having a family, of finding someone who truly cared about her. And now, in the most unexpected way, she had found it. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked, her voice breaking. "I was afraid," Edward admitted. "Afraid you'd resent me. Afraid I'd die before I could make things right. But now I don't want to leave this world without you knowing how much you mean to me." Before Anna could respond, the door to the room swung open and Claire marched in, her expression stormy. Behind her was a security guard and a stern-looking lawyer carrying a briefcase. "I see you're still here," Claire said, her tone dripping with disdain as she addressed Anna. "This charade has gone on long enough. It's time for Edward to sign the will." Anna stood protectively by Edward's side, her tears drying as anger flared within her. "You don't care about him at all, do you? You've been waiting for him to die so you can take everything." Claire's eyes narrowed. "Watch your mouth, nurse. You have no idea what you're talking about." Edward, summoning the last of his strength, spoke up. "She's right, Claire. I know everything. I know about the medications you switched. I know about the lawyers you've been meeting behind my back." For the first time, Claire's confidence faltered. "You're delirious, Edward," she said quickly. "You don't know what you're saying." But Edward's gaze was sharp. "Dr. Harrington has the proof. Blood tests, security footage, and your signature on the orders to tamper with my treatment." As Edward's words hung in the air, the door opened again, and Dr. Harrington entered with 2 police officers. He handed a file of documents to the officers, his expression grim. "We have enough evidence to charge Mrs. Benson with attempted harm and fraud," Dr. Harrington said. "Claire, you're under arrest." Claire's face turned pale, and she took a step back, her composure unraveling. "You can't do this. You have no idea who you're dealing with." The officers stepped forward, placing her in handcuffs. "Claire Benson, you're under arrest. You have the right to remain silent," one of them began as they led her out of the room. As the chaos subsided, Anna turned back to Edward, who looked both relieved and exhausted. She sat by his side, taking his hand in hers. "It's over," she said softly. "She can't hurt you anymore." Edward gave her a faint smile. "I couldn't have done this without you, Anna. You saved me. In more ways than one." Tears welled up in Anna's eyes as she leaned closer. "And you gave me something I've always dreamed of, a family. Thank you, Dad." The word Dad seemed to breathe new life into Edward, and his smile widened. "Hearing you say that is more than I could have ever hoped for." In the days that followed, Edward's condition stabilized, and Anna stayed by his side, helping him regain his strength. The news of Claire's arrest spread quickly, and Edward's pharmaceutical company launched an internal investigation to ensure no further wrongdoing had occurred. Edward officially named Anna as his heir, not for the wealth, but to symbolize the bond they had finally found. Together they began planning for a future they never thought possible. The bright morning sunlight streamed through the hospital windows, casting a golden glow over Edward's room. It had been a few weeks since the chaos surrounding Claire's arrest, and for the first time in years, the atmosphere was filled with hope instead of tension. Edward, though still frail, looked noticeably better. His complexion had improved, his strength was gradually returning, and there was a new light in his eyes, a light born from the bond he had finally found with his daughter Anna. Anna sat beside his bed, a notebook open on her lap. She was jotting down notes about his medications and physical therapy schedule, but her mind kept wandering. Every so often she glanced at Edward, smiling softly. The man who had once been a distant patient was now her father, and the realization still felt surreal. "You're staring," Edward teased, his voice still weak but laced with warmth. Anna chuckled, closing the notebook. "I'm just amazed at how far you've come. You're a fighter, Dad." Edward's eyes sparkled at the word Dad. "And I owe it all to you," he said. "You didn't just save my life, Anna. You gave me a reason to keep living." Edward's recovery wasn't just physical, it was emotional as well. With Claire out of the picture and his health stabilizing, he began reconnecting with his company. Though he couldn't manage the day-to-day operations, he worked closely with his trusted team to ensure the pharmaceutical company thrived. He also made a bold decision to redirect a significant portion of the company's resources to research rare diseases, inspired by his own struggles and Anna's resilience. Anna quickly became involved in these efforts. Her experience as a nurse and her innate compassion made her an invaluable part of the team. She worked closely with doctors and caregivers to develop training programs aimed at recognizing and preventing patient abuse, something she had witnessed firsthand in Edward's case. "You're making a real difference," Edward told her one afternoon as they reviewed proposals in his home office. "Your ideas are going to change lives." Anna blushed, ducking her head. "I'm just trying to help, the way you helped me." Edward reached over, placing a hand on hers. "You've already helped me more than I can ever repay. Now it's my turn to support you." One crisp autumn morning, Edward surprised Anna with a plan he had been quietly working on. "We're going to the beach," he announced, a playful grin on his face. Anna blinked, caught off guard. "The beach? You're barely out of the hospital, Dad." "Exactly," Edward replied. "And what better way to celebrate than to fulfill the day we always talked about? You've been by my side through everything, Anna. It's time we created some happy memories." Though hesitant at first, Anna eventually agreed. They packed a small picnic, bundled up in cozy sweaters, and set off for the coastline in Edward's car. The journey itself was filled with laughter as Edward shared stories from his youth, and Anna couldn't help but marvel at the joy in his voice. When they arrived, the beach was quiet, the waves lapping gently against the shore. Edward took a deep breath of the salty air, a look of contentment spreading across his face. "It's beautiful," Anna said, her eyes scanning the horizon. "Not as beautiful as seeing you happy," Edward replied. They spent hours walking along the sand, talking about everything and nothing. Edward shared stories of Anna's mother, painting a picture of the woman she had never known. Though bittersweet, the stories brought Anna a sense of peace, filling in the gaps of her past. As the afternoon wore on, they found a quiet spot to sit and enjoy their picnic. Edward poured them each a cup of coffee from a thermos, the warmth cutting through the crisp breeze. "This is exactly how I imagined it," Edward said softly, staring out at the water. "A perfect day with my daughter." Anna's throat tightened with emotion. "It's more than I ever dreamed of," she admitted. "Thank you for giving me this." Edward turned to her, his expression serious but tender. "Anna, you gave me a second chance at life, and you've shown me what it means to truly love and be loved. I'm the one who should be thanking you." Their day at the beach marked a turning point for both of them. Edward, now more determined than ever, dedicated himself fully to using his company's resources for good. Under his guidance, the Pharmaceutical Institute launched initiatives to provide affordable treatment for rare diseases, ensuring that no one else would have to face what he and Anna had endured. Anna, meanwhile, found a renewed sense of purpose. She took on a leadership role within the company, spearheading projects aimed at improving patient care and advocating for vulnerable populations. Her tireless efforts earned her recognition in the medical community, but more importantly, they gave her a sense of fulfillment she had never known before. Months later, Edward and Anna stood together at a gala hosted by the pharmaceutical company. The event celebrated the launch of a new program dedicated to rare disease research, and Anna was the guest of honor. As she stood on the stage delivering a heartfelt speech about her journey and the importance of compassion in healthcare, Edward watched with pride. When the applause died down and Anna stepped off the stage, Edward pulled her into a hug. "Your mother would be so proud of you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Anna smiled up at him, tears in her eyes. "And I'm proud of us, Dad. We've come so far." That night, as they sat together in the quiet of Edward's study, he turned to Anna and said, "You know, I used to think my legacy would be the company, the wealth I've accumulated, but now I know it's you. You're my legacy, Anna." She placed her hand over his, her heart full. "And you're mine." In the end, Anna and Edward's journey wasn't just about finding each other. It was about rediscovering hope, resilience, and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. They turned pain into purpose, proving that it's never too late to make things right or to start anew. Their story reminds us that family isn't just about blood, but but about the connections we choose to nurture and protect. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more stories of courage, love, and redemption to life. Stay tuned for the next inspiring tale, because sometimes all it takes is one story to change everything.